Thank you. I started the Hoping Foundation in 2003. I'd become, over the 10 years before that, more and more interested in what I was seeing on the news about what was happening in Palestine, and I found that I just found myself becoming sort of, hard to find the words, but sort of disbelieving. I couldn't believe the things that I was hearing. And my best friend is a Palestinian academic, and every time I would hear something or read something, I would say, this can't be true, can it? And she would explain what was going on, and that actually what seemed to me really quite shocking and outrageous was nothing compared to what was behind it. And I found that I would kind of get in lots of arguments and generally felt incredibly angry about what I learned, and just got stuck in these kind of arguments with people and found myself incredibly frustrated, and really quite frustrated by myself being so frustrated and thinking, what can I do? And there's nothing that can be done. And the way the whole issue is presented is it's very complicated, it's political. If you don't understand the ins and outs of the politics, really you ought to be silent because you don't know anything. And at that point, my friend Karma and I, we decided to set up a charity for Palestinian refugee children. And we sat around thinking about what we wanted to portray and what we wanted to people to imagine when they heard about us. And we decided to call ourselves the Hoping Foundation. And Hoping stands for Hope and Optimism for Palestinians in the Next Generation. And the charity is a children's charity, and this is partly so that through children you can avoid or try to avoid some of the repetitive argument that always springs up around this issue. And listening to Karma, who is extremely knowledgeable about the whole subject and has worked in the politics of Palestinian politics, what I found inspirational about listening to her was that her whole conversation was about a solution-focused conversation. And even though there isn't a solution at the moment, to listen to somebody speak in a way that suggested that there could be a solution, or talked about the possibilities of progress or how things could be different in a constructive and positive way, I found really inspirational and made me start to think about how I wanted to speak up on something that I cared about so much and care about so much. And so we started the Hoping Foundation, and what we do is we have grants for very small organizations in the camps. We support children not just in the occupied territories of West Bank and Gaza, but in Libya, in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and the West Bank and Gaza. And in each different area, there's usually a different set of problems that people have to live with. And really, I found I'd been to Jerusalem and I'd been to Palestine in 1996. And when we set up Hoping, I thought, right, okay, I'm going back, because for me, the best way to speak to people and to find out is to have seen, to go there to see and to be able to relate. And because it's so complicated on one level, I found that by telling people what I'd actually seen when I went on one trip and the wall was being built, and I saw it being built completely indiscriminately. There was one bit that just went through somebody's back garden. There was no consideration whatsoever. It was just like watching some horrible manga cartoon where this wall just sprang up and and slice through people's lives, separating people, houses from, imagine if you were living in a row of houses and opposite was a row of shops, grocers, butchers. That wall goes right between, divides the people from the things that they need, and often they'll have to make a huge long trip to go round and to get necessities. The other thing that struck me enormously when I went out there and visited the projects that we were working with was the incredible patience of the people. And one of the things is that you don't actually hear about people. You hear about incidents, you hear about wars, you hear about suicide bombers, you hear about militants, but you don't hear about people, and you certainly don't hear about children. And every time I go there, I find it's so uplifting, strangely uplifting, to be there with people who are so longing for normality, and also the incredible sense of humor, the very black humor amongst the Palestinians that goes with the endless patience of having to wait for hours and hours just to get from A to B. I mean, things that I find constantly shocking to me, and I find it's so hard to see things and hear about things that have no... In our world, they're just so unacceptable, yet going out there and finding that there are roads that only Israelis are allowed to go on, and if a Palestinian is caught on one of the roads, there is a whole set of different number plates. If you're a Jerusalem inhabitant, and mostly an Israeli, you have a yellow number plate. If you're a Palestinian, you have a green. If you're caught with a green number plate, you'll be fined $2,000 or put in prison. The other things, I mean, there are millions in facts, but some of the things in Palestine, the water, they have to go through a huge process of permits to try to get anything like a well. If you want to dig a well out there, you have to have a permit from the Israelis, which rarely comes, and if it does, it's delayed, and even some people who try to collect rainwater have been forbidden to do that by the Israeli army. If you want to live here in Notting Hill Gate and want to go to Chelsea, you have to get a permit from the Israeli authorities, which rarely comes. So if your family, which is quite normal, is living there, you may not see half of them for years. One professor who at Birzeit University when I last visited her a couple of years ago, hadn't been to Jerusalem for 6 years. The things that just seem incomprehensible, like women being forced to give birth at a checkpoint because they're not allowed to go through, they're just sort of incomprehensible. And children who have been waiting to have there's one child who was waiting for an eye operation. All the paperwork was there, yet inexplicably they weren't allowed to go through the checkpoint, and the eye died, and they never got the eye. Sorry. In the refugee camps in Lebanon, there are 74 different jobs that Palestinian refugees are not allowed to apply for. I mean, even if this was happening in South Africa, there would be a complete outrage. Yet what I found when I went to Palestine, and I travelled in from the Allenby Bridge, and I drove through, and on every single hilltop I saw a settlement. And my English sensibility felt like, but this is outrageous. Somebody should call the police idiotically, yet this is happening under the whole gaze of the entire world, and yet it's getting worse, and every time it gets worse, everyone thinks it can't get any worse, and yet it is. The siege, the wall in Gaza, I went to Gaza for the first time about 3.5 weeks ago, and what I saw was a mixture of kind of a huge pile of rubble everywhere, yet I also lots and lots of men on donkeys collecting this rubble and taking it to a factory where they were crushing this old concrete up to make into new concrete to try to repair buildings, because concrete hasn't been allowed into Gaza since 2009. Other things that aren't allowed into Gaza are paper, things to repair photocopiers with, a million other, maybe not a million, but numerous, pasta, chocolate. Every week there's a new thing. I find it's an offense to human sensibility that these things are happening, yet they're justified they're not justified, they're given a term of security that, and the whole thing is so distressing that I think it makes people turn away from the whole issue. And I found that since I've been involved with the Hoping Foundation, and the things that we do are very small, but they're normal things. We do small educational grants, we do sporting activities, we buy football outfits for kids, we've bought the Boy Scouts some outfits, we've created film units where children can make films and become interested in photography. We try to do things, everything we do is a request-based thing. So different people in different areas need different things. In Lebanon, where it's almost impossible to get into higher education, we were asked for scholarships, and now we do 12 scholarships a year for students to go to business school, which is, all the schools are, most of them are run by the UN, and they only end up with a diploma, they don't end up with a certificate that they can go abroad with. So through this, they're able to get a proper degree and go and work abroad and become a bigger money earner for their families. Other things we do every year, we fund summer camps where children, especially in the West Bank, can meet each other. Because of these permits, children just don't get to do the normal thing, gather around and do things together. So they're so simple. Like in Gaza, we funded a trip to the Geology Museum where those kids were able to see things from their own heritage and have a feeling of real pride and interest in where they're coming from. And the other thing, that we have a formal alliance with the UN UNRWA, which is a special organization that was set up in 1958, I think, when the Palestinians were kicked out of Israel, and it was a temporary organization. 60 years later, it's still going strong, and it acts as a sort of national health service. And this year we're doing an UNRWA yearbook, which 50,000 children all over the Middle East, in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, the West Bank and Gaza, on the 19th of November, each child recorded a message into a flip camera saying their name, their hopes and their dreams and their interests. And those messages are going up on a computer in each school, and then they'll be able to communicate with each other across borders and share the kind of things they're doing in their schools and their home, and just generally be able to see what they're doing. And there's so much curiosity about what's happening in Gaza, for instance, or what's happening in Shatila camp in Lebanon, which, even though it's a huge Palestinian refugee camp, had one of the most amazing atmosphere in there, somewhere between Dr. Seuss and the French Resistance, just this feeling of energy and joy and closeness and communication, yet people live in incredibly difficult circumstances. I found that through Hoping has been like a kind of medium where people can make a gesture, can do something, and so many people who supported us don't want to be involved in the politics, yet they do want to do something. They do want to support the kids. They do want to just take some kind of action which says, yes, I do care, and I want to demonstrate it. And we've done all sorts of things. People have been so generous, from giving £5 to the committee for our fundraising event, the people who've given their time, energy, and their money, to musicians like Massive Attack and Primal Scream who've put on fundraising concerts for us. We've had incredible artists involved in our fundraising events, from Elton John, Lulu, David Gilmour, Jules Holland, Lou Reed, all sorts of people who, and even, ordinary things like Grazia magazine, just things, because this is such a politicized issue, it's important that it comes into the mainstream so people notice the people, they notice the children, and they're the people who are suffering so much. And I found that, and I hope you'll find that if you want to make a gesture to help Palestinian refugee children, however small it is, that it is the beginning of something. And it is through all of us making a small gesture that it will change what's going on. Thank you.